4:41 a.m. Central Europe, local time. Long before sunrise, motion sensors positioned along a secondary road in Eastern Europe register something unusual. At first, it looks routine. Heavy vehicles moving slowly in sequence. Then the thermal signatures sharpen. Large engines, wide tracks, low angular silhouettes. According to unverified monitoring data, this is not civilian traffic. This is armor. 4:44 a.m. First alert triggered inside a nearby US military installation. An automated perimeter system flags abnormal ground vibration patterns. The alert does not indicate an attack, but it does trigger heightened observation protocols. Base security shifts from routine monitoring to focused surveillance. At this stage, there is still no confirmation of intent. 4:48 a.m. Identification begins. Electro-optical sensors and thermal cameras begin classifying the movement. Analysts note consistent spacing between vehicles, coordinated speed, no civilian escort. According to unverified OSINT assessments, the formation likely consists of approximately 20 Russian main battle tanks, possibly T-72 or T-90 variants, supported by a small number of armored vehicles operating further back. This information is not officially confirmed. 4:52 a.m. Distance to base, 18 kilometers. At this range, the column poses no immediate threat, but its direction is unmistakable. It is moving toward a US-operated base that plays a key logistical role in NATO regional operations. This alone is enough to raise concern. 4:56 a.m. US base. Posture shifts. The base does not go into lockdown. Instead, quick reaction. Forces are quietly alerted. Vehicle access points are secured. Air defense and counter-drone systems are brought to standby. According to unverified military observers, personnel are instructed to remain calm and avoid visible escalation. The goal: do not provoke. 5:02 a.m. NATO awareness expands. The movement is now visible beyond the base. NATO regional command nodes receive a classified update indicating armored activity approaching a US installation. Though no hostile action has occurred, this distinction is critical. At this moment, the situation is ambiguous, and ambiguity is dangerous. 5:07 a.m. Russian column maintains speed. The tanks continue advancing at a measured pace, not fast enough to suggest an assault, not slow enough to suggest caution. Military analysts later describe this as calculated pressure, a way of asking a question without speaking. How will you respond? 5:12 a.m. Distance closes 12 kilometers. At this point, the column enters what planners consider a reaction zone. If the tanks continue, US forces would need to decide whether to block shadow or withdraw. None of those options are neutral. 5:16 a.m. US armor mobilizes, unverified. According to unverified field reporting, US armored units stationed near the base begin repositioning. No advance toward the Russian column, no retreat. They move instead into defensive overwatch positions, hull down locations that allow observation without provocation. This signals readiness, not aggression. 5:21 a.m. Fire control systems stay off. Despite the tension, there is no indication, at least publicly, that either side has activated fire control targeting systems. This is a crucial restraint. In armored warfare, fire control activation is often interpreted as the final step before engagement. So far, that line has not been crossed. 5:27 a.m. The base goes quiet. Non-essential movement inside the US base stops. Vehicles remain parked. Personnel stay indoors or undercover. There are no sirens, no public alerts. To the outside world, nothing appears wrong, but inside the command center, every screen is lit. 5:33 a.m. Distance 7 kilometers. Now the Russian tank column is close enough to be positively identified by multiple sensors. The count stabilizes, roughly 20 tanks. This number matters. It's large enough to be intimidating, but too small for a full assault on a fortified base. That contradiction deepens the mystery. 5:38 a.m. Strategic interpretation shifts. Analysts begin to agree on one thing. This is not an attack, yet instead it appears to be a demonstrative maneuver, a controlled approach designed to test US reaction speed, measure NATO command discipline, probe rules of engagement, all without firing a shot. 5:44 a.m. US command takes direct control. Local commanders are instructed to hold position. No warning shots, no armored push, no public statements. This decision pushes responsibility visibility upward, away from the battlefield and into strategic command. That alone reduces the risk of accidental escalation. 5:49 a.m., the most dangerous window. The column slows, engines idle, spacing tightens. For several minutes, nothing happens. This is the most dangerous moment, when both sides wait, unsure of the other's next move. A misinterpreted radio call, a sudden engine surge, a nervous gunner. History shows wars often begin here. 5:55 a.m., something unexpected. Instead of continuing forward, the lead Russian tank halts. The rest of the column follows. Turrets remain forward, but do not align directly on the base. This detail is subtle, but critical. It suggests presence without intent to fire. 6:01 a.m., standoff forms. For the first time, the situation stabilizes. Russian tanks remain stationary. US defenses remain ready. No new movement occurs. This is no longer an advance. It is a standoff. By this point, no shots have been fired, no threats have been issued publicly, no borders have been crossed, yet the implications are enormous. 20 tanks moving toward a US base is not an accident. It is a message. Because what happens next is not about movement, it's about decisions. Who speaks first? Who backs down? Who escalates or doesn't? 6:09 a.m. The standoff hardens. By now, the Russian tank column has been stationary for nearly 10 minutes. 20 tanks, engines idling, turrets forward but not raised. This is no longer a movement, it's a message. Inside the US base, commanders understand something critical. If this were an attack, it would already be underway. The fact that it isn't is intentional. 6:12 a.m. US command shifts to Phase 2. Phase 2 is not about defense, it's about control. According to unverified operational reporting, US commanders initiate what is known as escalation containment posture. No visible troop surges, no armor pushing forward, no public alerts. Instead, they let sensors, not soldiers, do the talking. 6:16 a.m. NATO enters full awareness mode. At this point, the standoff is no longer local. NATO regional command centers receive live feeds, satellite imagery, thermal tracking, electronic emissions. The Russian column is now being watched by multiple allied nations simultaneously. Still, no public acknowledgement. Silence is part of the strategy. 6:21 a.m. Why 20 tanks matter. Military analysts later focus heavily on the number. Why 20 tanks? Too many for coincidence, too few for a base assault. Experts believe this number was chosen deliberately, enough to intimidate, enough to force reaction, not enough to justify retaliation. This is pressure without provocation. 6:27 a.m. Unverified fire control activity. Here's where the tension spikes again. According to unverified NATO-linked sources, limited fire control subsystems on several Russian tanks briefly activate. Not full lock, not sustained targeting, but enough to confirm capability. US systems detect the change immediately. This is the closest moment to open combat. 6:29 a.m. Inside the base. No panic. Contrary to what many imagine, there is no chaos inside the US base. No scrambling troops, no shouted orders. Instead, pre-planned response matrices are reviewed. Counter-armor options are evaluated. Air support contingencies are quietly confirmed. Everything is calculated because panic is escalation. 6:34 a.m. A critical decision is made. This moment will never appear in headlines, but it may be the most important. US command decides not to mirror Russian fire control behavior. No target locks, no ranging, no turret elevation toward the column. Why? Because mirroring would turn signaling into a duel. Instead, restraint becomes the counter message. 6:39 a.m. Russia reads the signal. According to strategic analysts, this is when the Russian side likely reassesses. The US response is clear. We are ready, but we are not baited. That matters, because escalation without reaction loses its leverage. 6:44 a.m. The first de-escalation move. One Russian tank slightly repositions, not backward, not forward, sideways. This is a subtle but powerful armored signal. We are not advancing. US crews notice instantly. 6:47 a.m. NATO opens de-confliction channels, unverified. According to unverified diplomatic reporting, secure military communication channels activate. No press releases, no statements, just controlled messaging. Boundaries clarified, intent restated, escalation limits reinforced. This is diplomacy conducted under the shadow of steel. 6:53 a.m. Engines begin to power down. Acoustic sensors pick up a change. Some Russian tanks reduce engine RPM. Dust clouds thin. Thermal output drops. This is not retreat, but it is de-escalation. 6:58 a.m. US holds position. This is crucial. The US does not advance, does not pursue, does not capitalize. Why? Because forcing humiliation escalation invites retaliation later. The goal is stability, not victory. 7:05 a.m., the standoff breaks. Slowly and deliberately, the Russian column begins to realign, not toward the base, not aggressively outward, but away. The tanks begin moving back along the same route they arrived. No smoke screens, no sudden acceleration, just withdrawal. 7:11 a.m., no cheers, no relief. Even as the tanks pull away, US forces remain on high alert, because historically, withdrawal phases are dangerous. Misinterpretation can still trigger violence. Nothing happens. 7:18 a.m., incident concludes. The Russian column exits the monitoring zone. The immediate danger passes, but the event is far from over. 8:02 a.m., the real battle begins. Analysis. Now comes the quiet aftermath. Analysts begin dissecting. Response time, command, discipline, sensor overlap, escalation thresholds. This incident becomes a case study almost immediately. Why this incident changes the playbook. This was not an accident. This was not routine movement. It demonstrated how close armor can move without triggering war, how signaling replaces firepower, how restraint now defines strength, and most importantly, how thin the margin really is. The real, then this happened. What happened wasn't an explosion. It was precedent. After this incident, patrol routes quietly changed. Engagement rules tightened, monitoring zones expanded. Europe didn't get safer. It got more controlled and more fragile. Tank warfare between nuclear powers doesn't start with attacks. It starts with movement positioning, fire control readiness. This time, restraint held. Next time, the clock may run out. 20 tanks moved toward a US base. No shots were fired, but every line was tested, and the silence that followed spoke louder than any explosion.